Hey, everybody. Welcome to another brand new episode of Hey Man, It's Okay, a men's mental health podcast. I'm your host, Sky, your regular guy.
And I'm your other co-host, Ryan, your licensed marriage and family therapist, your licensed psychotherapist. And today we have a couple of really cool guests with us, Jim and Bela. Did I get that right?
You absolutely did. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. They both wrote a pretty amazing book called We All Die about the failures, I believe, of our healthcare system. And yeah, why don't you guys give us just a quick little overview of the book and your mission and maybe some ailments of our society?
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you guys for having us.
Thanks for having us. I'll kick it off maybe, and Jim can fill in where I miss out. We collaborated on this book. We
Great.
had worked together, and we
That's
worked in healthcare and different systems over the course of now decades of our career. And as we hear from others complaining about the United States healthcare system, we talked between the two of us and said, if they only knew, if you're an insider in the system, just how bad it really is. And it drove us to write a book, really to explain some of the workings of the system and as a call for action. We're hoping that some people, many people, will read the book and say, we've got to do something, and not necessarily to fix this current system. We propose that the system is not fixable, but really needs a do-over.
That's pretty scary if we only knew, because what we already know is enough to make us lose our minds. Just probably the only death that has maybe been celebrated by a lot of people was the United CEO. And he was really, I think, a symbol for a lot of people of their frustrations and the amount of money that we spend on this, the process that doesn't seem to actually make us healthier. I've heard a lot of times that the system is there to keep us sick. And I know I pay a fortune for my health insurance. Sky was talking about his good insurance, but I know I pay almost like $700 a month, and it's outrageous. But anyways, those are just my frustrations. Tell us about some of the...
It only costs you more as you get older. We introduced the book with a quote by Dr. Edward Deming that many people have heard, that every system is perfectly designed to get the result that it does. And our system, frankly, is not designed to make people healthy and better. It's designed, whether intentional or not, it's designed to generate a lot of revenue. And it does that. This country, almost 20%, we're approaching 20% of gross domestic product is on healthcare. However, in the world, we rank 69th by objective measure out of 110 countries as far as outcomes.
Wow, that's really low.
And you look at the countries that rank higher than us: Uruguay, Czechoslovakia, Singapore's at the top of the list, is number one in the world, by the way. But we're way down, just above 70th is Mexico. So we're certainly in the bottom half of delivering cost-effective quality outcomes. Where we lead, sadly, is in teen suicides. Other measures of health were awful. And I wanted to say, just be all about, this isn't this terrible, but really called for, can't we do something better? Shouldn't we do something better? Come on, let's get on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric out there about things like you've got a health system outside your window that's building a building, right? And there's almost a cultural momentum behind the bigger it gets, the better it's going to be. And that has not panned out. We've not seen better outcomes as systems have consolidated together. One of the chapters in the book, we talk about fire station healthcare, because you'll hear CEOs and others in healthcare talk about how healthcare is local, but it really isn't anymore. Most of it is being driven by large integrated systems that cover multiple states, multiple markets, and decisions are made centrally in a lot of cases. So we wanted to compare with other models, and fire departments are a great example when you're talking about healthcare, because fire departments are local. and they strive for prevention. So they spend a lot of energy and time and investment making sure that their firefighters never have to leave the fire station to fight a fire. And healthcare doesn't do. From a mental health perspective, it doesn't do it. We keep thinking the more therapists we add, because access is a problem, that we're going to solve the problem, but we're not going to the root causes of mental health crisis. There's a lot of, I think, misrepresented, not intentionally necessary, rhetoric out there about the system that just flat out isn't really true. There's a lot of stakeholders with a lot of money on the line. There are a lot of people that nibble at the edges when it comes to solving the healthcare system problem. I think there's a quote in the book. There's a CEO that I did some work for who used to say, we're solving the affordability crisis in healthcare. There wasn't anything that they were doing that was going to solve the affordability crisis in healthcare. It was just a good branding mantra. And you'll see the same thing when it comes to technology. There's been a lot of tech companies get into the healthcare space. You got innovators who look at how bad the healthcare system is, and they think, okay, we can innovate our way into something better. But if the underlying system is as broken as it is, you're not going to tech your way out of it. You're not going to spend your way out of it. You're not going to tech your way out of it. You really have to step back, be willing to throw the whole thing out and design from scratch.
And I think whether you love him or hate him, that was the impetus of people wanting RFK to be at the head. But it almost sounds, and it almost feels like, even if anything he does at this point is just not going to get us anywhere anyways. It's really depressing.
I think I've been surprised at the number of people. I was telling Bayla that I interviewed somebody one day who, throughout the course of the interview, it was a good conversation. Towards the end, the candidate talked about how glad they were that RFK Jr. had gotten appointed HHS secretary. And I had to just scratch my head because he represents radical change, but not systemic design change, and certainly not science-backed change.
There's obviously the incentive problem of greed. But what are some of the other greater barriers, hurdles to preventing any real change?
The system is incredibly fragmented. There are disparate, perverse incentives and disparate interests, no coordination. And we start to dissect this in the book. There's big pharma, there's physicians, there's insurance companies, there's administrators like ourselves, mental health. Jim and I work together, for example, in a large system, trying to integrate mental health, behavioral health into primary care. Why? Because doctors really aren't trained. They're forced to try and diagnose and treat some behavioral health and mental health, but really don't have that extensive training. So we tried to, and had some success in bringing in and integrating behavioral health, but still, even within that system, it was like we had to, that mental health, the stigma, the expense, we don't really make a lot of money at it. So really, there are just so many different, disparate, and uncoordinated interests that make it impossible, in our opinion, to fix the system that is not fixable.
Yeah, we talk about physicians. There are things out there that we can be critical of when it comes to physicians, but we also know that this system, as it operates today, really puts them on a hamster wheel. I use this all the time when I'm talking with all kinds of healthcare professionals, but especially physicians. I went to my primary care physician a few months ago. She was running about 45 minutes late. She came in. She knows I'm an insider. I said, how many do they have you seeing, Catherine? And she said, about 22 a day, and they double booked me a lot today. So what I try to tell administrative people in healthcare is, imagine if every day you came in to work, you had 22 meetings, you were in charge of writing the agenda, you were in charge of capturing the minutes, only so you could turn around tomorrow and come in and do the same thing. it's a miserable lifestyle and work environment for
That
providers.
sounds so overwhelming.
It burns them out. And I see the same thing in the counseling world. They get overloaded with caseloads. They don't have time to spend with people who need the time. That's why so many primary care offices have to do things like integrate other professions in, like behavioral health, because even if physicians knew what to do, they don't have time to do it. And then what happens is you get the next hamster wheel. You bring the behavioral health person in, and now you start managing their caseload to the point where it's pushing them into burnout. So do we have enough mental health professional resources to support our mental health counselors? Probably not.
Yeah. I've seen a handful of doctors over the years, and man, they're driven by these like RVUs, which I think is just the amount of clients and cases they can get in the door and how they can make that more efficient. It's just, if I was advising somebody right now on a career, I think doctor would be honestly on the bottom of that list, because it doesn't seem like it's the profession that it once was.
It's interesting you say. I've asked a number of doctors, friends or physicians I've worked with or reported to even. So would you recommend that your child, your offspring, go into medicine? Almost always, never say never or always, but almost always they say no. And certainly not primary care. Perhaps, if they really want to be a neurosurgeon, they can probably do all right. But primary care, heck no, it's a very tough, miserable hamster wheel. I also have, just to your point, Sky, a couple friends of ours, they're both physicians, invited us over to dinner at their house. And as we were wrapping up dinner, said, we probably ought to let you guys go home because we got to get to documenting. So after a day of seeing patients, they got to document and enter information so that they can bill appropriately and get paid. It's a tough rank. No, I wouldn't tell anybody to. I would probably recommend that folks go into nursing or to be a rad tech or something like that, because that need will always be there and they can have some normal hours. But the MD world is awfully deep.
And you wanting to get into this space. So you saw Amazon do the One Medical acquisition. That's a struggle. That's not going well. I think the mistake that all of us make, but certainly large companies like Amazon or tech companies make, is they think that healthcare is a rational market. And it isn't a rational market. It's multi-layered. Most people don't know how much they actually end up paying and what they actually ended up paying for. There's that periodic surfacing of price transparency, but there's a whole lot, you talk about that some in the book, there's a whole lot underneath that, because prices vary depending on negotiations with who the payers are. So you don't have the consumer going directly to a product or a service and making a informed decision, quality and cost. You have a middleman in there, which is in this case, the payer, which may be on the government side and maybe on the commercial side, but it doesn't mean it's rational. And I think Bayla has a great section in the book about an experience with somebody trying to steer him to a less costly provider, but they can't really force it because they're in network. Why would you believe your insurance company? They say, we prefer if you went over here instead of over here. But you say, but they're in your network, right? Yeah. Okay, then I'm going to go where I want to go. So it's just not a rational market. There's been a lot of, we call them doc in the boxes, but they come in all kinds of forms, where it's that little place on the corner, a retail strip that's got a nurse practitioner in there, and they try to sell on convenience and so forth. If you really start to look at those, it's not uncommon to see them closed part-time, because it's all dependent on keeping providers, and provider income isn't going to go down. And so providers go around and they shop. Where am I going to get the best salary? And so the turnover rate is really high. So all these little, like I say, nibbles around the edges of the system, they're not getting it done. They're not going to accomplish anything.
Thanks for reminding me, Jim. It's not a rational market. I don't know of any other, I really don't know of any other market. Not only do you as a patient not know what you're going to pay, but the providers don't know what they're going to get paid. They send a bill. They don't expect to be paid their bill. They're going to have some discount from, depending on whether it's a government payer or commercial insurance or private pay. The insurers can't tell you what they're going to pay because it varies depending on the contract they have. Nobody knows this, who's going to pay what and for how much and to whom. There's certainly not opaque pricing, inflated charges. Nobody pays what's on the bill. Unless you don't have insurance, then you're expected, the people that can least afford to pay that bill are the ones that are expected to pay the full bill. And of course, they can't afford it. What a mess.
That reminds me of when I go to my chiropractor, I don't know what I have to pay for my copay because it all depends on what the doctor did to me that day. So it could be a certain amount each day. But the problem is I have really, like Ryan said earlier, I have really good health insurance and I don't pay nearly as much as most people do. And I'm really thankful for it. But sometimes it's so confusing just to navigate even the simple things like, okay, this is my regular appointment. What am I going to pay? Nope. Depends on what the doctor did. And then you're charged a different amount every time.
And the doctor can't tell you because it's going to depend on
whatever the computer tells them that day.
It's not a rational market.
What was the catalyst for you guys where you got so fed up that you said, we need to write a book about this?
Can I take a crack at that, Jim?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And we both, there are numerous catalysts. That's a great question. Really, we'd thought about it and talked about it for some time, but we're at a point in our career. We're far enough along in our career. If we'd written this early as we were rising up and moving ahead in our career, we would have been fired.
For sure.
And
Absolutely.
And now I'm doing some consulting work in healthcare and strategy, and so I can't be fired, and I'm okay if I am. So it was that long-term desire to try and make some change happen, and the ability to take the risk.
Yeah, there's a lot of more than I would have thought. There's a lot of kind of fear of career mortality in the industry. It's probably true of other industries too. One of the systems that Bayla and I worked together in, my last few months there, this is a large multi-state system, and they sequestered a dozen or so of us for several hours a day for most of a summer. And our mission was to come up with 800 to 1,000 names to lay off.
Okay. That's tough.
And it was a grueling exercise, to put it mildly. I was probably not the most popular person in the room because I kept referring to it as the Hunger Games. And in my case, I was leading primary care activities. So I couldn't imagine any scenario where reducing the workforce in primary care made sense. But I was going to have to do it if I wanted to remain there. And it took weeks of toiling through what could we do that would be reasonable, what wouldn't. And the system, by the way, has continued to do this about every 3 years. Like they've gotten good at laying off workforce members on a cyclical basis. It's almost a cultural thing. And so in my case, I sat down with one of my counterparts. I was responsible for primary care and some specialty care activities. He was responsible for all the other specialty stuff. And I just looked at him and said, I can't do this. I came here to build something, not to tear it down. And he was getting near retirement himself. And so we just wrote our names on the list and laid ourselves off. And
Wow.
It was a really interesting experience because we went back into the conference room. We got our colleagues there. Everybody's being told to cough up their list of who's going to get laid off, hours with our name on it. And it was silent. Nobody said anything, which when it came to me, I understood because I've been playing the Hunger Games pretty hard throughout the course of all these meetings. But my counterpart, who was retired military, was just such an upstanding person in every regard. You would have thought somebody might have said, hey, thank you. thank you for the sacrifice that you've made and willing to step up and do this. Not a word. And that's when I realized people, just like their own physical mortality, they don't want to face career mortality. So when you start to go into that realm of people thinking they might not keep their job, it's shocking what they're willing to do. And we see that in politics. We see that in a lot of other things. I think healthcare is absolutely victim to that. There's a lot of careerism that goes on there, and people aren't willing to step up sometimes and just say, this isn't working.
Not only we saw that with you and others, and we're seeing it more and more with physicians and other providers that are leaving the profession. Physicians, I pick on physicians because, by golly, they went to medical school, residency, put in their time, and early career are deciding that the hamster wheel is not for them. I recently had a conversation with another physician friend, a surgeon, and said, I'm thinking to get some voice lessons at School of Rock. Really? You're doing? Yeah, I've always wanted to sing. I like to sing. I like rock. She's talking about next year leaving her profession as a physician and just singing from here forward. Wow. Talk about a career change and a career shift. But all those years of training and experience, just not willing to do it anymore. And you hear that the burnout rate with providers is high and increasing. Not just physicians, but providers at all levels. Nurses that are burnout on the floors or even in clinical practice. Pick a provider and they're burnt out.
My little brother works in the hospital system, and yeah, he and everyone he knows is just burned out. Everyone runs on Red Bull and barely enough sleep to get by. It seems pretty crazy. You're talking about this corrupt system, and you're talking about, it needs to change and it needs to be totally torn down. What would the next steps be? What would they look like in trying to move forward and change it? How do we all get involved, or how do other doctors get involved with fixing these glaring issues? How do we make it about people and not about the money?
People ask us that all the time. So what's the best system? And I'm glad to see that I don't know. I know that there are systems, other countries that are doing much better than we do. I talked early on about Singapore being ranked as the number one country in the world as far as healthcare and outcomes and cost, and by a number of measures. There are enough really smart people in this country, and there are enough people that are suffering in this current system. So I would suggest a grassroots effort. And that was a hope with our book, is let's get really the dialogue moving along, get folks together, do some brainstorming, do the research, look at other systems, and think out of the box and come up with something. Just here's what you need to do and let's do it. Not so much. We need to start from scratch. We take a lot of people to work through that transition, but now's the time. Then I'll let Jim take a turn. I'm just reminded of a physician and a conversation I had with another physician recently and said, boy, I don't know. Frankly, I don't know if there's an appetite for change in this country. There are so many vested interests. And the physician said to me, oh no, things are going to change. I said, wow, that's pretty optimistic. Why do you think so? He said, because this is going to break. When things break, we will have to do something. I hope that's not the case. I hope that we can come together and do something sooner than when it's absolutely broken. Feels like it's breaking right now.
And when you look at other countries, some of them have this blend, this mixed private and public solution where there's a certain level of coverage for healthcare that's government supported, and those that want and can afford more than that can go into a private solution. I don't know, maybe that's it, maybe that's not. I think what we wanted to do was sound the alarm and say, don't keep trying to fix this one. This one's not fixable. Like, we got to be willing to step back and say, no, it needs a complete redesign. And that's a hard conversation to get started because, as Bayla said, there's so much vested interest. There's so much money in it right now. When you're talking about 20% of GDP, there's a lot of money going into a lot of pockets. and to get people interested in changing that, a lot of difficult. I also think too, I mentioned earlier that the healthcare industry has been influenced. A lot of things are influenced by politics. It's probably as influenced by politics as anything. It's also influenced by religion, cultural things. We talk about what's been going on like pro-choice versus abortion and what that's doing to different states and different health systems and how they're navigating that. We got to figure out how to pull it away from that stuff, and take that noise away from it and really talk about system design as opposed to it becoming this almost emotional issue people have. Employers as well. The fact that we tie it to employment is a real problem. It
Makes no sense to me.
your average tenure is 4.5 years. So that means people are having to like change networks that they could potentially be accessing healthcare every time they change jobs. We're trusting that our employers are good at picking out a big plan. I don't know that most employers know what they're doing when it comes to picking out a big plan. And we created a whole number of sub-industries around it because of the structure. And tight with the employer has not been done.
Let's step back and just kind of the fact that we're referring to this, and Ryan, you touched on this, that we refer to this industry, the business of healthcare. It's a business. In physician practices, we talk about production, but they're machines and people or products to be processed. We really need to step back and think differently, in my opinion, in our opinion. Does this really need to be a business or an industry? Is the air we breathe an industry? Yeah, maybe in certain parts, but I would wish that we could look at this as something that is requisite for the betterment of society, for the social order.
One of the things we talked about when it came to, it was about physicians, but this cuts across a lot of different professions, and this is to Bayla's point about it being a business. I used to sit in on quite a few compensation when it comes to physicians. And we talk about this in the book. You talked about RVU and physicians being incented based on basically volume in some cases. I used to sit in on physician committees that designed their own compensation formulas. And I was there administratively to make sure that whatever we came up with was legal, sustainable, reasonable within certain boundaries. But physicians we tend to have very specific opinions and views on how they should be compensated. One of those is, if I'm a physician, I don't want to be compensated exactly the same as my colleague because I think I work hard. So I should always make more than my colleague because I work hard. So how do we measure how I work? One of the committees that I did some work with, I listened to their conversation. And I kept thinking, how would they feel if one of their patients was in the room right now? Because their patients don't have any idea, like, how important this stuff is to them. And so we ordered one of those director's chairs with the canvas backs and had the word patient embroidered on it and put it in the conference room at the table for that meeting. And they thought I was crazy when I brought that in. But I just set it up and they said, "What's that?" And I just want to know what your conversation would sound like if one of your patients was in the room. And this is a reminder. Would you be proud to have this same conversation in front of your patients or not? And it got some boos and some hisses, but I had some people talk to me afterwards that said that actually really made a difference. And of course, they kidded me that I was the administrator that cared about the people more than physicians did, but I don't really buy that. I think most of the docs really cared about people, but they get caught up in all the perverse incentives and how can I generate more income and all those things that come with the territory of becoming a physician. And they needed a reminder.
And unfortunately, when you talk about how systemic this problem is, it really also starts with academia and the hundreds of thousands you need to take out to become a physician, just to become a therapist, the amount of money I had to take out. And then I almost exclusively only see private pay because the insurance doesn't reimburse anywhere near the same rate that I can get. And I also feel terrible that I'm not necessarily as accessible and only accessible to a certain demographic of people. Um,
We talk about this in the book as well. I recalled a meeting. I was a chief financial officer of a large multi-specialty physician group, and a finance committee meeting. The practice was owned by the physicians, and they were on the board of directors. They headed the finance committee. Once a month, we had a finance committee meeting, and there were usually formal affairs. And one of the physicians on the finance committee showed up with champagne. Whoa, what? You don't drink at these finance committee meetings. These are stodgy affairs. She said, oh, tonight I'm celebrating. We're celebrating. Elderly physician. She'd been in practice for decades. What are you celebrating? Celebrating that I finally paid off my student loan and that I finally have paid off my buying into the practice, her equity in the practice. She paid off both of those loans a few years before her retirement. Boy, and that was, like, again, somebody that had been around for a while. Students coming out of medical school now, multiple six figures in debt when they start out. So they have to make a bunch of money just to pay off the debt, let alone all the other demands of our economy at this time.
So you guys said we got to throw out the system. What is there any actionable step that we can take? I'd love to think my vote counts for something, but I don't even know about that. What can anybody do? Even if you were like the world's richest man, if you were Elon Musk, just trying from start, could he even make any sort of change?
Yeah, I think it's got to be. I mean, we struggled with this because it's obviously we can point out all the problems all day long, but if we can't talk about solutions, then what's the point? And I think there were some things that we wanted to throw out as ideas, not necessarily design ideas, but how do you get some momentum behind this? And some of the challenges, and then I'll go past the challenges, but some of the challenges are, like I've said, politics plays a huge role in this. Religion, to a degree, plays a role in it. And then just general corporate America plays a role in it. How do you battle those forces when they're all at odds with one another? And I'm not a big social media fan. I've been on many platforms, but I've decided for my own mental health that's probably not good for me. But I do think that the right influencers out there, people whose voices are listened to, kickstart something. Because what it really needs is momentum. It needs to change the conversation from fixing to replacing. It needs conversation that says this shouldn't be about politics. It's just healthcare. It's like your fire station down the street, right? This doesn't need to be mired in politics. It doesn't need to be religious. It needs to serve the people of the community. And that might be locally, maybe not, hopefully is locally. So how do we get people that have influence beyond what Bayla and I have to actually step up and start having a voice on this topic in a big way? I would rather have, maybe bad example, I would rather have Taylor Swift promoting a new healthcare system than Elon Musk.
Makes sense.
Obviously this podcast will help. More of that, getting the word out. But some of the solutions really are simple. We talked about pricing, transparent pricing. Everybody pays the same thing. Taking this out of the employer's hands, where everybody is on the same playing field. Then we don't need insurance companies. If it's out of the employer's hands, there's an efficiency to be gained. Pretty quick fixes just there. Easier said than done, of course, but with a very healthy dialogue, making those demands, we remain hopeful.
Back when just as the Affordable Care Act was under negotiation and coming into play, I spent some therapeutic time writing I don't know, it was about a 90-page manifesto about healthcare. Fortunately, I threw it away because it was probably a bit too much. But one of the things I was trying to point out in it, at the time I had done quite a bit of work for a large Blue Cross plan on the East Coast. And you walk by this 45-story building every single day that's filled with people that are part of the healthcare system, but not one of them actually performs any healthcare services, right? And they've got big time branding and logos. They've got billboards all over town or all over their state. They've got a stadium.
A stadium sponsoring, yeah, sponsors.
That was just one state's Blue Cross plan. There's 39 others, just Blue Cross wise, I think, out there. That's about the right number. A bunch of other commercial carriers. And you think about the money being spent on those 45-story buildings, all those sponsorships, all those billboards, all those buses that have advertising on the side of them. And you say, that's factored into our cost of healthcare. Why?
And what's crazy is we don't really even get all that much choice. They spend all this money on marketing and really we're captured by it anyway.
Right. Because our employer picks it for us.
Yeah.
Or because of our age, we fall into a government sponsored plan. But yeah, you're right. It's not even marketing to us as individual consumers as much as it probably is marketing to employers.
Yeah.
We talk about this in the book also. We haven't spent a lot of time on this call talking about the big pharma, but
It's an important one.
guess which sector in the economy spends the most on lobbying? You'd think big oil, other industry, pharma spends more than any other industry or sector for lobbying efforts.
Well, and they keep the television companies alive too. I think something like 60-70% of all advertising on mainstream TV is.
Yeah, I watch that stuff and it makes me want to have the disease. I gotta wait. This is going to be great. And we spend more for the same medications than any other country and with lousy outcomes. So some regulation or a lot of regulation is another area. We talk about transparent pricing, taking it out of the employer's hands. And there are some seemingly easy fixes that are hard to implement.
There's a lot of talk about value-based care in the system these days, and I'm not against it. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's done what so many things in this industry have done, which is, I'll give you an example in a minute, but it's created check boxes, right? So in value-based care, primary care groups are saying, okay, then we've got to make sure that we're getting people in for the colonoscopies and we're getting in then for the mammograms and we're getting them in for certain preventative things, or we're managing their diabetes and keeping their A1C down. Those are all good things. But as you start to see how operationally they get executed, it's just checking a box. Like the talk is, we're moving away from volume and just cranking people from the office, and we're moving to managing a population's health by doing preventative things. But it's almost a byproduct of the volume. The more value-based they go, then the more they say, we need to manage a larger population of people. So you're back to the volume game again and putting people on the hamster wheel again. I'm not sure, while it's a good idea in theory, I'm not sure how our system goes about executing it is good. Another example of that is years and years ago, hospitals especially started there would survey their patients using surveys like a Press Ganey survey. And hospitals would put up big banners saying top 1%, Ganey, our patients are happy, they rated us in the top 1%. So then it became a race, right? Everybody's out there doing the same thing, and the goalpost just keeps changing. So, that's good because hospitals were paying a little more attention to what kind of experience were patients having. So that's not a bad thing, but it became a marketing gimmick. It became a branding gimmick, as opposed to how genuine is it. I talk in the book about one consulting group that would go in and coach a hospital to give the survey in the hospital room before they were discharged. Who's going to say bad things when you're laying there and you just want to go home? You're going to say whatever you think you got to say to get out. You get all kinds of biases introduced to it. And that's what kind of keeps happening in this system is you'll get something good that comes along only to get perverted in another way.
Are they starting to take mental health seriously, any of these systems? Or is it just another box and another way that they can
I would
cast?
say I'd love to hear Bayla's thoughts on this. I think there's a genuine interest in improving mental health services and especially access to mental health services. There's a supply shortage for sure. There's a funding shortage for it for sure. You probably know that it doesn't. You got to really generate a certain amount of volume to make it economically viable as a career or as a practice. But what I don't see them doing is anything on the preventatives. So why are so many people in crisis? Why are so many people? And I think that's a conversation we should be having just as much as supply and access.
See, I have come from a different angle a little bit. Much of my experience has been on the insurer side. I was a chief financial officer for a publicly traded company, and ultimately, and I had aspired to, and I was president of a health plan for a publicly traded company. Behavioral health and mental health really is a nuisance to those plans. It's something we've got to cover it. We've got to do it. We wish we didn't have to, and they talk a good fight. And even on the provider side, large integrated delivery systems would rather do surgery and other stuff that makes a bunch of money, knowledge, and wish we could do something about the mental health, behavioral health crisis. But boy, it's a pain. It's expensive. We can't make money at it. There aren't enough providers. I think that's generally a bias. So when you say, do they take it seriously? There's acknowledgement and a wish that it wasn't, but generally a view that it's in our way. That's my perspective. Jim?
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the reason I got so interested in addiction recovery work was because when I was doing primary care work, the providers would generally consider somebody who came in with an addiction as, I'll use the term, a flow buster. They would just bust the flow of their day and they wouldn't be able to get the hamster wheel all the way through their 22 visits. And so they didn't want anything to do with it. They wanted to offload those cases as much as they possibly could. And it wasn't because they were bad human beings. They just you're stuck in a bad system that doesn't reward them for taking care of people in a more holistic way. It just doesn't.
So sad.
Well, yeah, it is sad. And I think that can apply more broadly to mental health in general. It's just considered a flow buster to a doctor's office.
Yeah, that breaks my heart. Just that term, a flow buster.
Yep.
And yet our mental health, if we did anything preventable for it, would solve so many other crises. But then we wouldn't have people on the operating table, or we wouldn't be having as many diabetes. We wouldn't need as many prescriptions.
Man, you guys, I feel like we could talk about the healthcare system for a long time, but why don't you tell our listeners where they can get your book so that they can read, and also where else can they find you guys, and where can we begin?
And any other parting
Any
words?
other parting words for our listeners?
I would just say that it sounds like we're beating on the system. We're critical of the system, but not just for the sake of being critical, because we have hope and want a system that works for everybody. As far as buying our book, there's an e-version available on Apple, at Barnes & Noble, and Amazon, as well as the paperback available, all those sources and more. Jim, I can't even remember the list of.
Yeah, there's about 18 ebook retailers that have it available, including the ones Bayla just read. So it's pretty easy to get your hands on. And what we really want, I think what I know I really want is for people to read it and then step back and change their own conversation that they're having about it. Change it from, if they could only fix this to what would a better system look like and how do we get some momentum behind that? Let's stop talking to our elected officials about fixing it. Let's talk to our elected officials about replacing it.
And as
Love
far
that.
as reaching Jim and I, we'd welcome the conversation. We've been invited to speak to some industry groups. Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're both on LinkedIn. We'll respond, maybe not within minutes, but certainly within days, we would respond and love to have a dialogue with anybody that would reach out to us. Welcome to do speaking engagements. However we can get the word out and get something happening, you're welcome.
Great.
Well, yeah, we really need to get the books in some politicians' hands, some courageous politicians.
Yes.
Well, speaking of courage, man, I really admire you guys for sticking your neck out there, taking the stance, actually doing something about it, because the amount of people that are just captured in silence by by the money, by the massive system that it is, it really takes some courage. And I truly admire you guys and thank you guys for coming on.
Very kind of you to say, Brian. I will tell you, a number of folks in the industry, when we started talking about it, that's the reaction we got is, yeah, you guys should do this.
We're behind you all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go into battle, we're right behind you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you guys. And thank you guys for shedding light on this issue. And maybe together, maybe with this message, we can all work on making something better.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, that does it for us here at Hey Man, It's Okay. Thanks for tuning in to another episode, everybody. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share this out with your friends. If you need help, please reach out to us. There's our website. All of our social media is at Hey Man, It's Okay. And from Sky, it's okay to not be okay.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys again.
Thanks, everybody.
Be well. Take care.